It's been a while, so today we're gonna go over my top reads of 2020. I read a total of 36 books, which I know for some people on BookTube that seems like nothing, but for me that's amazing. It's fantastic, it's phenomenal, it's life-changing, it's all the good words. I don't want to say only 36 books because I think 36 books is a lot, but with those 36 books it was still hard for me to pick a top 10 because I feel like a lot of the stuff I read this year I actually really enjoyed, but I did it. I picked the top 10.
We did it, Joe.
I'm not gonna babble on too much, so let's just get into the list. So at number 10, we have Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. And so this is a romance, and I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I usually don't like romances or like the rom-com-y type of books, but this one did it for me. Life, Chloe Brown, we obviously meet Chloe, who has a chronic illness, and then she has this near-death experience, and you know, her life flashes before her eyes and she realizes that she hasn't really lived a fulfilling life. So she makes a list to help her live a more robust, fun, rebellious life, and with that enters in Red, and Red is her landlord slash handyman that lives in her building, and you know, he's kind of fine, but like they don't get along. So technically this is maybe like a haters to lovers or enemies to lovers romance, even though to me, who knows why they actually didn't like each other. I don't think it was a real reason, but it was still enjoyable. I think what made this book so good for me is the fact that the characters really had some depth to them. Like we learned a little bit more about what they were going through in life, and then on top of that, the juicy parts, the steam was just so good. When I say that the steam, the spice, it did it for me. It did it for me. So yeah, this book is just so sweet, so good. Highly recommend you to pick it up. It's a quick read and I'm sure that you're gonna love it. So the next book on this list is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. So this book follows a woman named Maggie who, when she was younger, she lived in an allegedly haunted house with her parents, and they only lived there for about 3 weeks before they like packed their bags and like skedaddled out of there, apparently because there are some ghostly happenings going on. And Maggie's dad writes a nonfiction book talking about this haunted house and all of like the ghostly, paranormal, creepy things that are going on. But this is kind of a rift between Maggie and Maggie's dad, because she doesn't actually believe any of that stuff happened while they lived in the house. But Maggie also can't remember what actually happened when she was living in the house. So when her dad dies, Maggie inherits this house and she goes to make some renovations so that she could eventually sell it so it can just like be out of her life altogether. But while she's living there, those same things that she didn't believe in start happening while she's at the house. The little paranormal, the little freaky vibes, it all starts coming back. And Maggie's like, wait, what the fuck? Was my dad telling the truth? Y'all, Riley Sager always takes me on a ride at the end of his books, but the last 50 pages had me shook. And it was funny because when I was reading the last 50 pages of this, me and my roommate were both actually like reading in our living room, and she literally had to ask me like 15 times, like, are you okay? And every single time my answer was no, I'm not okay. This book was freaking fantastic. If you like thrillers, if you like mysteries, I think that you'll really like this. So yeah, and if you haven't read anything else by Riley Sager, you're missing out. And this is definitely my favorite Riley Sager book. The next book on the list is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. So in this book, this world, there's no disease, there's no war, and death is just like a lot harder to come by. And so that's entering in the Scythe, who they essentially get to decide who lives and who dies. But really just who dies. Someone has to figure out who's gonna die, because not everybody can live. Like they still have to control the population in this seemingly perfect world. So there are a set amount of scythes. So when a scythe, it's time for them to retire per se, they have to find someone to come fill their spot. So we meet Rowan and Citra, who are chosen to be apprentices for a specific scythe, and it's difficult for them because neither one of them essentially want to be a killer as their profession. So it follows their journey of what this experience is like for them and them accepting the fact that they potentially will be a Grim Reaper. And I also appreciated that both characters understood like the gravity of like death and what it means to like take a life from these people, because I think that maybe in some stories that's like not the case. Excited to read the second book in the series. I haven't gotten to it yet, but it's on my shelves and I need to read the second one before I forget what happened in the first book. The next book on my list is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. So this story follows two sisters, one who lives in New York and one who lives in the Dominican Republic, but they don't know that each other exists until their dad dies in a plane crash. And so when he dies, all of these secrets come out about like these two families that he has across the globe, and everybody's reactions to finding out this information are a bit different. Elizabeth Acevedo is my girl. Like the way that she writes certain topics are just phenomenal. And the fact that this book is written in verse and it still covers so many topics that are just so relatable to brown communities is just phenomenal, amazing. If you haven't read anything by Elizabeth Acevedo, I think that she does a fantastic job of delving into the complexities of the relationships in brown communities, especially the ones between a parent and a child. And the way that she just makes them so relatable is always just awe-inspiring to me, because even though I can't relate directly to this situation that's happening in the book, I always come out feeling like I see a piece of myself in these stories, even if I can't directly relate to what's actually going on. There's just certain like nuances that Elizabeth Acevedo just grasps and communicates in such a fantastic way. Highly recommend. The next book on my list is TheOne by John Mars. And if you follow me on Instagram, you know how much I love this book. And if you don't follow me on Instagram, what are you doing? So in TheOne, it follows the idea of being able to find your perfect match through a DNA test. So you give some blood and boom, you find your soulmate. But it's not that simple and it's not that easy. TheOne follows 5 people who find their perfect match, but it's just not the fairy tale that they thought it was going to be. To put it into perspective without me giving too much away, just think about the downsides of finding the one. Because what if that person is like super old and like wrinkly? And I'm not saying that old people don't deserve love, but if you're 25 and you match with someone who's 70, you're probably gonna be upset. In the same vein, imagine if you match with someone who's just like a horrible person in general, but then that's supposed to be your soulmate. How are you going to react to that? In the 5 stories at the beginning of this book, there were a couple stories that I cared about more than others, but that changed really quick and I ended up loving every single storyline because they each follow a different kind of like what if situation when it comes to finding your perfect match and the scenarios that you could possibly find yourself in if you were to participate in something like this. I think the pacing was phenomenal. You're gonna speed through it. It hooks you from the beginning and it'll have you saying what the fuck about 15 times. And who doesn't love that feeling in a book? Even after reading this book and figuring out all the what ifs that could happen with this experiment, I would probably still sign up. I don't know what that says about me and my love life. It's probably nothing good. I think no matter if you're interested in thrillers, if you're interested in sci-fis or mysteries or romances, I think that there's something in this book that you'll really enjoy. But let me know in the comments if you would sign up for an experiment like this where you could find your perfect match or your soulmate through a DNA test. I really just hope that I'm not alone in possibly taking this. Let me know. The next book on the list is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. The emotions that this book made me feel. So this is a non-fiction book following Chanel Miller, and for those of you who might not be familiar, Chanel Miller is the woman that Brock Turner sexually assaulted on a Stanford campus a few years ago, and he was only sentenced to 6 months of probation, which was freaking disgusting. And so the story got really wide, one, because of that, because he was only sentenced to 6 months, and it really just opened the door real wide on the flaws in our justice system. And it also became widely known once Chanel penned kind of her take on what had happened via a BuzzFeed article. And so this book kind of goes deeper into her experience with the trial and the lasting effects that it had, not only on her, but anybody that was involved in the case, her family, her friends. And this book, just like I said, it had me feeling a lot of things. I've always known that our justice system is beyond flawed, but this just opened up to how when there's a case of assault, the system is meant to protect the perpetrator and not the victim. And a lot of the times when the victim or the survivor goes through the trial, it almost re-traumatizes them. And I don't think that, me not having been in that experience myself, I didn't realize just how bad it was. And although Brock did this traumatizing thing to her, Chanel is able to intertwine humor and her pain all together, along with like some semblances of hope. And the writing of this is just absolutely beautiful. Chanel mentions that she loves writing and that she's going to write some things in the future, and I will definitely pick it up. And although this is a hard topic to discuss and read about, especially depending on what you've been through in life, I still recommend for most people to pick this up. This book is phenomenal, and if you haven't read it yet, you definitely need to. These next 4 books are probably entering into the realm of my favorites of all time. Yes, I said all time. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Deep by River Solomon. So The Deep explores the idea that African slave women who got tossed overboard during the slave trade are the originators of a water-breathing society. So think mermaids. But for this society to function correctly, they have to remember their past and their ancestors and what it took for them to get there. But their past is so traumatic that not everybody is tasked to remember these things. So they have a thing called a historian. And in this story, the historian is named Yetu. And Yetu actually really takes on every single memory, every single event, and she remembers all of these things. They literally are weighing her down. They're killing her. And so she wants to escape to try to figure out how she's supposed to deal with the weight of remembering all the experiences and memories of an entire society of people, or mermaids. And so not only did I enjoy the beautiful writing in here, like it's so hard to describe what type of writing it is, but it was almost like poetic. Not only did I enjoy the writing style, but I enjoyed the fact that I got introduced to a new world. I got to go on a complete new journey with Yetu in such a short amount of pages, which I think is so difficult to do. One of my other favorite books of all time is actually Kindred by Octavia Butler. And what these 2 books have in common is that they intertwine like things that have actually happened in the past and like historic events with these elements of sci-fi. And I'm learning that those 2 things combined together are just like my kryptonite. And so now that I know this, I'm going to be looking for a lot more books like this in the future. So number 3 on my list that I think has also worked its way into my favorites of all time is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is another book that's going to have you being like, what the fuck just happened? But I love that in books. I know this isn't a new book by any means, and I'm a little late to the party, but for the rest of you guys that also are a little late to the party, like me, I'll give a quick synopsis about what this book is about. So Dark Matter follows Jason, who wakes up as himself, but his life is completely different. So his wife is no longer his wife. His son is no longer his son. He has a completely different job. And so he wakes up and is like, what's actually going on? And while that might seem innocent enough, some crazy things go down in this book while he's trying to figure out how to get back to his normal life. And some of the themes are actually like really terrifying and scary to think about. And maybe that's just because I watch like too much things that evolve like conspiracy theories. I don't know, but just thinking about some of the ideas in this book just like really terrified me, but like in the best way possible. And I don't want to say too much because I feel like I kind of go in too much of like what goes on, then that's gonna be spoiling the book for you. And I think it's just best if you just go in not knowing too much about it. But I think if you're into sci-fi, you're into thrillers, you're into mysteries, you are really gonna like this book. You're in for a ride. I know there's a movie supposed to be coming out really soon, and I'm so excited to see how they implement that into a movie. But yeah, if you guys haven't read Dark Matter yet, get on it. we're almost to the end. We're almost there. The next book on my list is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is literally the most terrifying book I have ever read. So terrifying to the point where like I didn't want to read it at night. I didn't want to read it while I was by myself. I thought I was hearing things when I was reading it, and I think a lot of it just had to deal with the fact that this is just a true story. I'll Be Gone in the Dark discusses a search for the Golden State Killer, and the Golden State Killer was a serial rapist and obviously a serial killer who really terrorized California in the 70s and 80s. Obviously, the idea of a real-life serial killer is already terrifying as it is, but what made him so creepy and really had people on edge all the time is the way that he would sneak into their homes, and the fact that he didn't really have like a set type of person that he would go after, because he would not only like rape and kill women on their own, but he would also target couples. So people just really never felt safe in their own homes. And then to top it off, one day he just disappears. Like he just stops all of his transgressions and just kind of falls off the face of the earth without being caught. But 3 decades pass and we meet Michelle McNamara, who is a true crime journalist, and she's really just becomes obsessed with the case of the Golden State Killer and just wanting to actually find him. So we follow Michelle's journey as she's trying to find all the tips that she can. She goes and revisits a lot of the sites that he committed these crimes at. She partners with like a real life cop and detective to really try to figure out who the Golden State Killer is, because at this time he's still not caught. And when I tell you, Michelle's writing is so atmospheric and so chilling. Like the story is already really terrifying and creepy, but the way that her writing is, it really reads like a thriller or a mystery, like a fiction one, but it's just creepier because this is nonfiction and it actually happened. So Michelle intertwines her experience searching for the Golden State Killer with segments that describe his actual crimes, and that's the part that just really had me freaked out, because the way that he, like I said, he would enter these people's houses kept me up at night. So the Golden State Killer actually wasn't caught until 2016, which is after this book was published. So I could just imagine having read this book initially, still not knowing who he was. But with the copy that I have, it does explore like how he was actually caught. And let me tell you, it's a wild freaking ride. I already love true crime, so I was bound to enjoy this book anyway, but the writing of this is like nothing I've ever read before. And if you're into thrillers, if you're into mysteries, and you haven't really stepped into true crime, I highly recommend this book. Like I said, it's kind of terrifying because it's real life. So if that's too scary for you, maybe take it with a little bit of caution. But I still recommend for everybody to just try to step out of their comfort zone on this one, because it's a really interesting story and a really interesting case. And the way that Michelle puts it together and writes it is just absolutely phenomenal. The last book on my list, and one of the books that I enjoyed the most, definitely one of my favorites of all time now, is The Martian by Andy Weir. Another one where I know that I'm a little tardy to the party, but I'm glad that I'm finally here. The Martian follows an astronaut who gets stranded on Mars, literally all by himself, and it follows his story of survival, living on a planet where there's nothing else that's living there, and people on Earth don't know that he's alive. I don't know what I was expecting going into this book, but it just blew any expectations I had out of the water. Like, it was a little sciencey, but it was just like the perfect storm of everything that I love in a book. So some of my favorite things to read in books is like soul survivors, space, and like a non-human like main character, which I felt like Mars was, because he was literally just trying to survive against this planet that was trying to kill him. And also Mark the astronaut in this book is literally one of my new favorite characters ever. He is so funny, which is not expected, because I would think that if you're stranded on a planet by yourself, you're gonna be a little down, right? But Mark's humor just really keeps him going. It keeps you going in the story. And if you haven't read this book, you definitely should. If you like any of those things that I just said, definitely pick this up. Even if you don't, I just think that this is a book, a great tale about survival, and you know, staying positive in the midst of adversity. So yeah, The Martian is definitely one of my new favorites and I highly recommend it. All right guys, so that wraps up my top 10 books of 2020. If you made it this far, thank you. You're my favorite. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.